Welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. I'm Charlie Paparelli. Today's guest is Brian Livingston, who is a two-time author here, two-time author. Today's episode is entitled On the Road to Becoming a Successful Fiction Writer. Why this topic now? I deal with a lot of entrepreneurs, and becoming a writer is a dream for many people. How many young men and women at universities know they were born to be a writer? Knowing this is what you should do, and making a sacrifice to get there are two very different things. Dreams becoming realities in a lot of cases are rare because reality sort of sinks in and what real life looks like once you get out of college. But writers like Stephen King, John Grisham, Daniel Steele, Emily Henry, they did it. Why not you? But what are the steps to get there, to become one of these people, to join the upper echelons of writer success? It starts with your first book. Today's conversation is focused on a new writer's second book and the hard road to fiction writer success. Brian Livingston is a former lawyer, now working in a nonprofit in land conservation. He's a husband, he's a father, he's a two-time published author. He has just released his second book entitled Folkston. It is available now on Amazon and all other booksellers. Today we're going to cover 5 areas. We're going to talk about his new book and also his first book, and what does it take to become a full-time writer? Or what has he learned on the way to becoming a full-time writer? And what does the business of full-time writer really look like? I'm sure Brian has thought through this. And what are the biggest challenges for a new writer to get to making a living at this career? And then lastly, we're going to talk about what's next for Brian. As you get to know more about him, you're going to want to know what's next too. So let's get started. Welcome, Brian. Thanks for doing this with me.
Good afternoon, Mr. Paparelli. Thank you for having me.
You can call me Charlie from now on.
All right.
You've got a second child on the way, so you're into manhood full throttle, okay?
All right, I can do that.
We are peers now, but thank you for that honor of calling me Mr. Paparelli. Yeah, I've known Brian since he's a baby, okay? We grew up in the same neighborhood as my kids, and I was very close friends with his mom and dad. And Brian has went off to be a success, as have many of the kids in that neighborhood, done very, very well. So that's why Brian calls me Mr. Paparelli. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. But you now, the last time that we talked, we did an interview on your first book, okay?
Yes.
Which was called The Habits of Squirrels.
Yes.
And you wrote that as it really was a product of, or a result of, you having completed the Appalachian Trail.
That's right. Yeah, a fictionalized version of a thru hike, trying to capture the spirit of it.
Yeah, well, you're one of the few people that I know that did the AT. And are you keeping up with people that have accomplished that?
I'm trying to, especially the people that accomplished it with me. Tends to be an eclectic group of characters that are fun to get back with, and then, it's a very unique sort of little set of experiences that y'all have together. It's fun to go back and relive.
Yeah, well, it's even, and that's a lot of it. We always hear about Marines who've been through Parris Island and how, they're Marines for life kind of a thing. Parris Island, I think, is it's an 8-week course or a 10-week course that you go through. How long did it take you to do the AT?
It was 144 days, however many weeks that is, just under 5 months.
Yeah, so 5 months. That's a 5 months experience meeting these people. So that's a very unique crowd that you'll be connected to for life.
Yes.
And they stay in touch like that?
We try to. People kind of scatter out across the globe. So, you lose touch with some, but it's always nice when you're passing through, to sit down, and it's an immediate reconnection. Like, you remember that time? It was so cold and such, or we were so hungry and such.
And you went, and what was everybody on the trail, learned this from your last book, everybody on the trail has a nickname?
Yep, trail name. I was Mr. Frodo, yeah.
And you were Mr. Frodo.
That's right.
And why was that?
Because, well, primarily because I'm short and I'm hairy and I have big feet. So my older sisters always called me a hobbit ever since those movies came out. And then when I decided to hike the trail, I hiked it with a little replica ring that I bought off Amazon for like $4. So I didn't name myself, but I came very close. People saw the ring
I
and
would
like, oh,
say
you're
that
Mr.
you
Frodo.
continued the tradition that you're from your sisters, right? I mean, the names
Yeah.
kind of stuck with. Oh, that's great. What were some of the other trail names that you walked with?
Oh man, I'll try and think of the good ones. There was Beacon because he was tall and he wore a bright orange shirt, so he looked like a beacon. There were Stumbles because she fell a lot. There was Mr. Giggle Fits because he had a very engaging laugh that was like sort of rapid fire. Oh, man,
It's okay.
yeah.
That's a good sample to kind of start with. And what is there? Just I just wonder, is there a profile that as you look back, is there a profile for people that have that not only the desire to walk the AT, but to people that actually finish it?
Uh,
Because there's a lot
you
of
know,
people want to do it. There's not a lot
yeah.
of people that ever finish it. What percentage finish the AT that started it?
It's been a while since I've looked, but it's usually between like 15 and 25%.
It's
And
that
that's
high. Okay.
yeah, and that's based on the people who actually sign in at the beginning and sign out at the end.
Oh, okay.
So I think statistics are pretty bad on it, but I would say that of the people I hiked with, most of the people at the beginning, the vast majority I didn't see again.
All right.
After sort of Damascus in early Virginia.
So it's like 80-20 rule at best, really, probably.
Yeah, that I think that's a good ballpark
Okay,
for it.
so when you looked at those 20% or less that actually started and finished the trail, how were they different than the 80%?
Well, there's a luck component to it. Obviously, just
Okay.
staying healthy and having everything in your life be smooth for 6 months, and then I've thought about it a lot. It's just people who enjoy it, the sort of the day to day, just looking at stuff and poking around and being kind of silly in the woods, or find something about the experience they enjoy. Most of the people who seemed like they were only out there to prove something or to kind of get the accomplishment, it's a long time and there's a lot of days where you're just walking through the woods and it's either wet or it's hot and it just sucks. And it's just, if you're not enjoying any aspect of it, eventually it seems to crack people down.
So it's more than a goal. You have to
Yeah,
enjoy it.
yeah. It's a cheesy thing, but like the journey is the destination. You're out there to do it, not
Great.
to have done it. Yeah.
Was there a time when you were on the trail where you almost became one of the 80% and didn't complete the trail?
Yeah. There wasn't maybe any crisis moment where I was like, I'm just going to call a cab and get off. But there, I mean, like going through Pennsylvania and then like that, maybe like the 50 to 70% range of the trail where you've done over 1,000 miles, you've been out in the woods for a while. For whatever reason that year, it got then really hot and really buggy. And then you're starting to look ahead and you realize like, I've been out here for 2 months. I still have 2 months left. What are we doing here?
Well, what happened that got you to actually, was there a real situation that got you to question that? I'm sure you kind of question it from time to time, but then there's that hit the wall moment.
I had some hikers around me that I really respected and that were mainstays of my hike. And felt like maybe a week, maybe even shorter than that, like 3 or 4 of them quit. And it is jarring and you feel it at that point when they quit. And this was in like Connecticut, which is a long way north. And so that got me really frightened. And then just like
What's the thought
climbing.
that you had when they quit? Like like they're mainstays. We're in this together. We're gonna make it. And you're going and going. You're all the way to Connecticut,
Yeah.
okay, from Georgia. And these guys go, I've had it. Why did they quit?
There's a couple of folks that just like knees gave out and stuff like that. One person had, like I said, like a family issue sort of come up and he had to get off. And then, well, I mean, it's only 50 miles, but it was awful just in terms of being really hot and really buggy and not anything going on during the day to sort of help you pass the time and take your mind off of it. And one guy just got fed up, just
Was it ugly
off the
too?
trip.
So it was an ugly walk at that point?
Well, you don't. You just, if I remember correctly, you just go over sort of like hills in Connecticut. So you're not getting like views. You're not gearing up for like a big hike each day. There's not like an accomplishment. It's just up and down and up and
You're
down
just
and up
walking.
and down. Yeah,
That's it.
the doldrums part of the trail.
And then so one guy physically and the others just got fed up with it all.
Yeah,
Just left. And then how'd that affect you then?
man, you really
These are your
feel it.
best buds. This is like, in it to the end, right? Okay,
Yeah,
and now they're gone. What do
you
you think?
kind of, I kind of tend to romanticize things, but you feel like pillars of each other's hikes. So it does make you feel a little bit like abandoned or unsupported. And then, it's like, man, some of these guys are just like, man, if that guy can quit, like any of us can quit. If that guy can go down, anything can happen. So you start to feel a lot more vulnerable.
So how long did that last?
Getting out of Connecticut, and then I think we went into Massachusetts. Probably when I got into Vermont and that back third of the trail, which is just so pretty, and all the towns up there are like made to be Appalachian Trail towns. So you really start having fun again. There starts to be like mountains and like really cool, just like little trailside ponds and streams that you can hang out in. And at that point, you're a really good hiker. So just like the stuff that's nagging you at the beginning in terms of finding the right shoes, getting your trail legs, finding out what you like to eat, all that's sort of on the back burner because you just handle that automatically. And it got really fun. I really
What
enjoyed
about
the last
that?
3 states.
So there
Yeah.
is that stress of sort of figuring it all out, and at the same time becoming a hiker and being strong enough and that you can endure the kinds of pain that you put in your body, the challenges you put in your body through. So then by the time you get up to Vermont, that's really cool that you just then can just enjoy where you are. All that
Yes.
other stuff is gone. There is no more stress associated. Like, what if I run out of food, and where do I stay in the next town, and how do I stay here, and where's the next? You have all that anxiousness going from the beginning that eventually starts to retreat, right? You don't have that anymore.
Yep. Yep.
Have you been in touch with those guys that did quit?
I have not.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's tough. But you like the people that you finish with or that like finish around you, you kind of have that little powwow at the end and you exchange all your actual information that, you'll be able to reach out in the real world. But the people that are lost sort of during the trail, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, well, once they leave, it's sort of like they didn't have the whole experience with you. So we're friends to the end. If you leave, that's the end. Obviously, that's what happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened for me, unfortunately.
I'm sure that's true of some of the other friends that you had too. That's great. All right. Well, I had to get into that a little bit. That I always see that I don't run into people. You're the last person that I know that started and finished the AT.
It's
Yeah.
still a pretty small group.
Yeah. Amazing. So now I know 3 people, that have done it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your new book.
All right.
First of all, how long have you been a writer?
I started writing The Habits of Squirrels 2018.
2018.
I puttered around on some, maybe a chapter or 2 of some other projects before that just never got anywhere. And then The Habits of Squirrels 2018, I sat down, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to see it through.
How long was that after you completed the AT?
5 years. A little
5
under
years
5 years
after?
ago. Yeah. Finished the trail 2013, August. Started writing Habits of Squirrels January of 2018.
No kidding. I
Yeah.
thought it would have been, you would have said, no, I've got this book in me. I'm going to do it. So it was 5 years before you.
Yeah.
Wow. And how long did it take you to start and finish that first book?
About 4.5 years to get it into a physical form that you could hold and that was edited and, where I wanted it to be.
So you started writing it shortly after the trail, or you started writing it in 18? I want to.
Yeah.
Started
writing.
in 18.
Yeah.
And it was actually in physical form.
I think it got published like March of 2022.
Wow. Okay. Man, so what happened for that 5 years?
But in between the trail and the book,
Yeah.
man.
Because you knew while you're on the trail, you're going to write a book.
Yeah, the
You
idea
knew
to
that,
write a
didn't
book
you?
about the trail came a little bit later, but I mean, those 5 years were sort of dominated by law school and just tried to keep my head above the water.
But it was always in the back of your mind that you had to get to it.
Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer, and then like you hear all those things, just like, oh, I always wanted to be a writer, but I just never sat down and did it. And so, well, I don't want to be one of those folks. I want to actually, make the push, and it just took 5 years of sort of thinking on it to actually sit down and make that big push, which turned out to be about a 4 year push.
Just for the listeners here, Brian is an unusual cat. He did win. He was the state of Georgia wrestling champion in high school in his division. So you are somebody who said, I just don't want to think about things and say I am whatever a writer and not actually write. Okay. So you sat down and you actually did it, which is
Yes.
incredible. That again, you talk about percentages, the 80-20 rules that we saw with the AT, those things apply obviously in life. And I see it every day also with entrepreneurs. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to start my own business. And I just never happen to get around to it, you know?
Yep. And that first step is kind of the hardest.
Yeah, it really is the hardest. And we're going to get into that a little bit with you. So let's talk about your new book. So, folks,
Okay.
tell us, well, when you do this, you've been doing a little bit of some interviews when was it released? Let's talk about that.
It had a launch date of March 29th, 2025, so just over a month ago.
Okay. And what's this month look like for you?
Just had that initial event, had a sort of a pre-launch event before it. Did a couple interviews that sort of got released during it, and trying to travel around and get in front of people. Went up to Greenville for an event. Went up to Knoxville. Yeah, just the it's a hugely labor intensive and time intensive, but like the best way if you're an unknown author to sell books is to get in front of people and sort of shove it in their face.
Yeah.
And then in
And
the lead up,
that's not really your personality either.
no, it is not. I don't.
Yeah.
I think
So
that's a small
that's very
percentage of
hard for
authors.
you.
Yeah, but
That's
it's
the one thing that's
necessary.
about writer to be a writer. The difficulty of being a writer is there's no leverage. So you have to write, you have to come up with the idea. You have to write the book. Okay. You have to push it forward. You have to do the interviews. It's you. It's hugely time intensive.
Yes, and I don't think before I started this journey that I fully grasped that part of it. I thought it'd just be sort of that romanticized, just a man in his laptop, sitting in a well-lit room with a view, with a glass of scotch, just writing, driving around to different folding tables throughout the Southeast.
Yeah, I think that's the way we always pictured Hemingway. I think it's the way that was always going to be.
Yeah,
Right down there. Wasn't his hometown eventually down in Key West?
it was. Yeah,
Yeah. So he had the view of the ocean, and he's in that cute house, and he goes out and talks to other authors and has a few drinks. Goes back and writes, and yeah, that's kind of the way it is. I
yeah.
guess it's not that way though, huh?
No, he's pretty rare. There's a reason we're talking about him, 100 years later.
So when you say it, if you really, as an unknown author, if you really want to push the book, you got to push it. You said it's almost like you said you got to push it in their face.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be
Aggressive that way.
well. You have to be in the store. It seems like you have to be something to make your book stand out, so it's not just another spine facing the crowd at the bookstore. And then ideally, once you build that fan base and sort of have that trust or interest or awareness of you, you don't have to do that as much anymore, or your book will sell without your face being right next to it.
Wow, that's tough. And the tough part too is there's not a lot of bookstores.
Correct.
Yeah. What percentage of the books are bought through bookstores versus bought through online through?
I think that'll change a lot between like Stephen King or Emily Henry than getting to me. A lot of my books are through independent bookstores or like the local Barnes and Nobles. But I think that changes as you move up sort of the echelons of it.
When you get to, I love that you say that, because I'm going to talk a little bit about how Stephen King and John Grisham and how they kind of got started. All right. But, I didn't give it thought to the industry itself, and the distribution channels for books has changed dramatically from when they started and today.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. So when you get to like this is an on the ground question, you go to your local Barnes and Noble, you're the author of Folkston. Tell me what that was like. What did you do?
The Barnes and Nobles come a little later in the process. I had to sort of try and build a name and like a Charleston reputation, and then they reached out to me on social media. At least the Charleston ones did, and were like, "Hey, we've seen you around. We've seen you doing such and such. Would you be interested in like coming and just doing like a 2-hour signing event at one of our stores?"
Oh, okay.
So you show up on the day about 15 minutes early. You wave to someone that hopefully knows that you're coming and say, "I am the author today. Where would you like me?"
And then you show up, and then it's scary because you're sitting there and you wonder, will anybody come by?
Yeah. Will anybody come by that's not just going to ask where the bathroom is?
Is that wow? Yeah. And so did people come by?
It's hit or miss. I've had some very successful events where people have come in and they've been interested and asked me questions and obviously bought books. And then you have books or have events where it's either people asking for the bathroom or just deciding whether it's more polite to give you the crotch or the butt as they try and sort of slip by to a different section of the bookstore.
It sounds lonely and scary, okay, to kind of self-promote like that, not knowing if there's going to be any acceptance or interest.
Yes.
It'd be tough. And writers generally are not promoters.
Correct.
That's the difficulty with it all. So tell us about the book.
So it's sort of a mishmash of my time as a prosecutor in rural South Carolina, and then my time as an insurance defense attorney in a more urban part of South Carolina, Greenville and Charleston. A young attorney from Charleston gets sent up to a little small fictional town called Folkston in South Carolina mountains for his first trial. And it's like a really sort of banal, tedious trial over, trash cans accumulating and a smell that potentially undercut a development deal. And while he's there, the insurance company that he's working for puts him up at a seedy motel, little roadside place called Sapphire Courts. And as the book progresses, there's sort of the friends that he's making and the time that he's having at Sapphire Courts. And then the trial sort of jumping, stopping, whatever you want to call it. And it's just how, as he becomes more engaged in the local world, how does that impact how he sees the trial?
The local world of Folkston.
Of Folkston, yeah.
Yeah, this small town, right.
Yep.
And as he gets more engaged in Folkston, what happens?
It just, without getting too much into it, he figures out, comes to question his role in the world, I guess, and decide, is this really what he wants to do? Is this the path he wants to take? And then, he comes to see sort of actual consequences because, that part of the world is riddled with methamphetamine. So he encounters that as well and sees the consequences of that.
I know your main character is Ethan.
Yes.
Who's this young attorney who has the pleasure of staying at Sapphire Court. And how much of Ethan's story is really your story?
A fair bit of it. I went from Atlanta to working in Walhalla, South Carolina. So I had similar sort of like whoa moment of moving into just an entirely different world. And then just in terms of a personality, I think he's much more of a type A. I'm going to be the best defense attorney and I'm moving up this career path no matter what it takes, at least at the beginning of the novel, more than I ever was.
And that wasn't you?
Correct, yeah.
No kidding. So you didn't generally we come out of law school, right? Or any, of those secondary education levels or postgraduate levels, I should say. And you're surrounded by people who are, generally very ambitious, right? I'm sure you had people. What law school was it you went to?
Washington and Lee.
Yeah. Washington and Lee. Oh my God. So you're in Washington and Lee. And a lot of those people went to work in Washington and law firms in Washington, did they not?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So in Northern Virginia, Washington, and those areas. And then you wound up in Walhalla.
Yep.
Why? How did you miss getting caught up in that fast moving stream of ambition?
Well, I did have the sense to know that I probably wasn't going to love DC or New York, and my goal all along was to end up in land conservation or environmental law on some level, and stay in the South. So like I came out of law school, I didn't have a job offer yet, but I knew I wanted to be in South Carolina, and then Walhalla is very close to Clemson, and it's in a nice uh, sort of wooded, mountainy part of the state. And it was really interesting work being a prosecutor, or they call them solicitors, in South Carolina. And that's how I ended up there.
And as a prosecutor, that's where you kind of ran into. This is where Ethan got a lot of his insights, okay, or his experience, I should say.
Yeah.
One, the small town and what that's like, tedious cases, okay, and small town people.
Yep.
Right, and what they're like. Is that where so that's the character Ethan? That's you.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of similarities.
Why did you start him off as being type A as opposed to being who you were?
It kind of came in the editing as I was finding the character and finding the story. It just made for a more sort of dramatic shift from being type A, fully on board with being an insurance defense attorney, and then just encountering his neighbors at the Sapphire Courts, Garth and Bobby and Frank, and then seeing the two attorneys that he's paired with, just that are lifelong insurance defense attorneys, and just sort of working his way back. It provided more room.
So more of a contrast, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, from one
more room to shift.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that happened to me too. Is I started in accounting, and you look around the room and you go like, I don't. It's a scary moment too. Is when you say, I don't want to be that guy.
Yep.
When you say,
I remember several of those moments.
That's the same thing with law, right? You're sitting there, and these people love what they're doing, and you're like, I can't. I don't have the ambition to be that. So then what is the question, which is a very scary question to ask as a young man or a young woman who's on a professional path like that.
Yeah, I got a couple steps down it.
You did.
It's a frightening moment.
When you wrote about Ethan, was there things that you learned about yourself that you didn't know?
I mean, a little bit with Ethan. Gabe Jenkins and I from The Habits of Squirrels went on a journey together, and I had to put a lot of myself. Ethan, since he came later in my writing career, and he's a little more closed off and just sort of developed. He himself didn't require as much self-reflection, mostly just reflecting on my time in Walhalla and just how I felt while I was there, just sort of being a suburban Atlantan in Walhalla who would go back to other suburban Atlantans and have them make the jokes about like a rural place, or just that disconnect there was something that I really felt like discovering and exploring.
Did it take how long did it take Ethan to become comfortable in Folkston versus how long did it take you to get comfortable in Walhalla?
I think Ethan, by the end of the book, he's probably sad that he would have to leave Folkston, and he's only there for like 10 days.
Yeah.
Man, it's a weird thing entering a part of the world as a prosecutor, because you're really just introduced to the worst of it. So whether I was ever comfortable in Walhalla is an interesting question. But man, about maybe 6 months to a year into my time in that part of the world, my wife was still in law school. It was just me and a dog. You work till 5 and then you just go out and hike and fish and just have a blast. And I liked the people that I worked with. Probably about 6 months for me to feel whatever comfortable was, or as comfortable as I was going to feel.
But you still felt uncomfortable because you are an outdoorsman.
Yeah.
So you had that way. So instead of blowing off steam by drinking too much scotch and watching too many ball games, okay, or too much TV, too many Law and Order episodes, you were able to go out and hike, as you said, and fish and do those kinds of things.
Oh yeah.
But you still felt uncomfortable after the 6 months. Where was the discomfort in the small town?
Well, knowing, I was young, but knowing that, my defendants on the other side of the cases were everywhere. And with
Say
it
that
being
again, I missed that.
the defendants that you're prosecuting on the other side of the case,
They're everywhere.
they're everywhere.
So wherever you are, they're pointing to you.
It kind of feels like it. I never had a bad interaction. I honestly never really heard of a bad interaction, but I do remember you just kind of side-eye every room that you go into and every restaurant, every store and stuff like that.
How about that? So that would be sort of like a New York prosecutor in the midst of the height of the mafia. It would kind of be that. They're sort of everywhere and they all look the same, right? They look like they blend in.
Yeah, and just like, again, being a suburban Atlantan, I stood out just in general appearance. Yeah.
So they could just look at you and say, he's not from here.
Yeah. Or
Why?
wait for me to speak.
Is that right? Okay. Why is methamphetamine, why is it so abused? Why is it so popular in these small towns in the South, if you will?
Well, I'll preface this. I'm not, a methamphetamine expert, but it's very cheap and relatively easy to produce. It's currently sort of mass produced in, I forget where now, but we've really outdone ourselves in terms of just making something that's just fully addictive, absolutely overpowers any sort of natural defenses that a human being would have to that. And, a lot of trying quote interviews I've listened to with methamphetamine addicts or past users, it's introduced to you at a time and a place where there's not a lot of economic hope or a lot going on. There's not a lot else to do. So I sort of think of it as in terms of how, like, my friends and I would have been introduced to alcohol in our teenage years.
Yeah.
Just in terms of, like, this is what you do when you turn 16, 17, 18, whatever. Instead of alcohol, it's methamphetamine, and it's just massively more
Addictive,
damaging and addicting.
So one of the things that I was struck by too is the small town, the people that, they're the stereotypical small town folks, yet Ethan finds them to be surprisingly interesting.
His and Garth's dynamic was particularly fun. They find out they like the same video games and the same movies, the same old action movies. Something
always a
that
connection.
Will bring, always something that'll bring people together.
And that happened to you in Walhalla.
Yeah. People I worked with and the people I encountered. I like old action movies too, so that's another thing Ethan and I share. Bonded over that.
So what did you hope that as you wrote the book and then eventually you're editing the book and you're coming up with more of a contrast and all here on this character, what were you hoping that people would get from reading the book?
That's a question that I think about a lot. It's like, what do I hope that this book does, or what do I think the purpose of a book is? And I just wanted to present something that would make people think about it differently, especially like what I was saying, just like when I was in Walhalla, being caught in between sort of the small town and the rural aspects of that, and then like the way people talk about criminals and encountering the criminals every day, and then going back to the people that I normally associated with and had grown up with or gone to law school with, and just hearing just a very dismissive way that they spoke about all these people, just trying to lay out the small town experience that I had out for them without trying to push the needle either way, or like even make just like a final, like, small towns are good stamp on it.
And that's why you were highlighting those different characters, those people and their occupations. Okay.
Yes.
Like the mechanic and whatever, to show that they're people too, and that they could be, they have lives and they can be respected. You were trying to have big city people sort of understand small towns as opposed to just discount them out of hand and not respect them.
Yeah, and then a lot of artists and authors have said stuff like this, but like the worst thing you can go into producing art with is an agenda and trying to like push off like I'm going to show that cities are the worst. I'm going to show that small towns are the worst or anything like
Yeah.
that. Just try and put it out there, and I kind of believe that like your beliefs will make it into your story. You don't have to, force them down people's throats, which is really unpleasant to read.
So you did not have an agenda as you wrote this, but
Correct.
your belief system, based on what you learned in Walhalla and other places, came out.
Hopefully, yeah. If I did what I had set out to do.
What about this? Is there anything so let's say it this way. What's the profile of the person that you think will pick up this book and really enjoy it? Where are they in life?
Man, I don't know. There's a saying that like you're supposed to try and like write for a specific person that you have in mind. That's a saying that I apparently do not abide because I sort of do like my characters are doing what they're doing, and it's my job to write down what they're doing and then try and find a satisfactory point at which to stop telling their story. That sort of highlights some sort of theme or something. Younger people seem to be enjoying it. People, that I've gone to law school with, and there are people that, about 35 and are sort of have a grasp on what at least part of the world is about and are looking to learn about other parts. And there's, looking for connections to different parts of the world.
How much of this, for you, being a lawyer, didn't seem to click well? Okay. In other words, it didn't feel in your heart of hearts to be your purpose. Is that a fair statement?
That I didn't see being a
You were
lawyer as my
practicing
purpose.
as an attorney. Okay.
Yeah.
You were hanging around with attorneys. Okay. Yet I understood it. It seemed like you were questioning that as an occupation for you.
Yes.
Okay. That seems to be what happened to those questions came up for Ethan, your character.
Yeah. For sure.
So was that somebody drifting a bit or having those, is this where I'm supposed to be kind of questions? Would this be a good book for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was told a couple times in between Habits of Squirrels and starting this book, there's like, you should write a book about quitting an attorney and being an attorney and like, what led you to that and all that. So this book's definitely part of that without that sort of being the main narrative.
When we last talked and you had just published, Habits of Squirrels. Okay. You said, yeah, I'm quitting my job as a lawyer and I'm just going to write. And we talked about discipline of writing and all those things, but you said, yeah, I've been writing and I've wrote some things, I'd write like 10, 20 pages and it's like, nah, that's not what it is. And that's not what it is. And then I'd go out and hike for a while and then I'd come back and I'd write more and that's not what it is. How did you finally get to what it is?
It's tough. My method of writing is about as time consuming and indirect as possible. So Folkston started life as a swamp novel and had a similar sort of idea of like an attorney goes to a town, but not a mountain town. It's a swamp town. Because I already wrote about the mountains. I want to write about the swamp. And then in that first sort of scene maybe the second scene in Folkston where he encounters Bobby and Frank for the first time on the stoop to the motel, it became clearer and clearer that the story was going to involve them and be about the inhabitants of the town. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to write about the inhabitants of the town, I've never lived in a swamp town. I have lived in a mountain town. So I was like, all right, right back to the mountains. So it's just... with the saying, if you're an entrepreneur, I think it's your first idea is never going to be what your actual product or what your actual idea is.
Yeah, that's pretty much true.
Yeah, so
almost 100% of the time. Okay, I mean, almost 100% of the time.
So just had to get down and spin my tires and burn through one idea, or however many ideas, and get to one that actually engaged me and started to take traction.
How long did that take from when the first, that's not what it's about and that's not what it's about? How long did it finally get you to get what I'll say is sort of right tracked? It's like, I'm not doing this anymore. I finally I'm here and I'm going. Okay. How long did that take?
So it was probably a year between publishing The Habits of Squirrels that I started writing what would become Folkston, and then maybe about 25 or 30,000 words into Folkston when I realized like this isn't what it's going to be. We need to shift it from swamp to mountain and let it take on that life, and that's when you start bringing in all those other elements that sort of make the world of Folkston.
But it sounds like the bones of the story were already in place.
The beginning bones, yeah, I wasn't sure where it was going to end up. It's always just sort of
Okay.
hoping it goes somewhere that produces a full story.
So you didn't have a storyboard on how this was going to be laid out and then write to that. You
No,
just
no.
started writing the beginning of the story and then let's see where it goes.
Yep, there's in writing they call them pantsers or planners. You know, planners outline and have their whole thing ready, and then there's pantsers that just sort of start writing and end up writing 25,000 words in the wrong setting, but do eventually get there. And that's definitely what I am.
I like what you said earlier about, you need to know when to pick them up and you need to know where to leave them off. Yeah, okay. I took Ethan and it was a 10-day process and then we left and Ethan went wherever Ethan went.
Yeah.
I don't know what his next adventure was going to be.
Yeah. But his story in Folkston ended right here.
Okay. So what about the first book, Habits of Squirrels? You went through, now you talk about someone not knowing you. You're a ghost and just suddenly appears that I've written this book and now what do I do, right? Hope people buy it. You continue, so you went through a promotion process and all. Whatever happened to the book? What's going on with it?
It's still doing its thing. The good thing about books is that as you're promoting one, you're still promoting, your name at the bottom or the top of the book. So, somebody sees Folkston, they enjoy it, they buy Habits, or vice versa. And then if I'm out there promoting Folkston at my folding table, wherever, I'll have both of them out there.
Yeah.
Habits does seem to have found, on some level, a footing and have a place in the world, which I'm really proud of. That it seems to have a
congratulations on
small but self-sustaining readership.
What does that look like when you say it's found a footing? What does that mean? As far as number of copies or whatever. I mean, I don't know what that means.
For me, because for authors, you gotta temper it all a little bit. It's just in terms of seeing reviews on Amazon or on Goodreads or sales come in through the website or somewhere, or having people reach out, just names I don't know. That'll leave a review.
That's important, right? Dad's already written 34 reviews on on squirrels. Okay.
Yeah.
So, under all of these different names that he put in there on how great it was. I just love that. Okay. But so as a new author like that, how many, brand new first book, how many, what's a good expectation as to number of books that one might expect to sell over, say, a 2-year period, or 1-year period, because it goes off the map pretty quick because books are always coming online, baby.
It's a bleak market. All these statistics, are based on, partial data and, different things, but like the average book or maybe just average self-published book sells way under 1,000 copies in the course of its lifetime. Yeah. So Habits of Squirrels is beating that. But, going around to festivals or going around to other, bookstores and meeting other authors and talking to them, that's a thing you need to keep in mind.
Books, self-published.
If you're doing really well. That would be, I would have to assume, in the top.
And how much money do you get for each book?
It varies a lot. So I publish my books probably the most expensive way you can in terms of being professionally edited, having awesome cover art, and then looking good through Ingram with just like looks like a professional book. So with all that, you buy my book on my website. It's like $10 a copy comes to me. It's like $5 through Amazon, and then if a bookstore, because the bookstores buy it through an intermediary, it's about $1.
Wow. So when you're doing that, if you look at 1,000 books, statistically saying that's doing really well. then you're making maybe $4,000 to $5,000 or less.
Yeah, or less, and that's before you get into just editor cost, cover designer, other things you encounter.
And because how much did that cost?
It's expensive if you're gonna get a professional to do it. About $2,000 for the editor, depending who you go with for cover designer, maybe 3 to 500 or and then if you get marketing services or anything like that,
You could
chips away.
spend $3,000 to $4,000 coming out of the gate with a book and maybe gross $5,000.
Yep, and again, that 5,000 is doing pretty well.
It would be going pretty well. Okay. Wow. I didn't know you go through bookstores and you're going through all those different hands, you wind up with $1.
Yeah, and I think it's even bleaker. I haven't cracked this part of the world. If you're going through traditional publishing, it's, maybe, pennies or,
No
maybe
kidding.
a quarter. Yeah. But, they'll pay for stuff up front.
What did you learn from writing the first book? What did you learn from Habits of Squirrels? Like you said, it took you 4.5 years.
Yeah. So for Habits of Squirrels, I did the same thing. I wrote probably 25,000 words about a different character, and then Gabe Jenkins was just going to be a character that he encounters, and then readjusted, made it about Gabe. But once I got through a draft of that had just sort of all the elements in there on some level, I went through and I got a book called The Story Grid, and I literally gridded out what the peaks and valleys of the story were and where everything was and the acts and all that. And I called it putting the little moments into cubes, and you just sort of take the cubes and move them around and try and make that as interesting as possible. That taught me so much about just the internal ups and downs and formatting and plotting of a book. And then for Folkston,
yeah,
I didn't have to do that, which was nice.
But what did you learn then, though? But you learned something from writing Folkston. And Folkston took you, 2 years?
Yeah, just about 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah, okay.
Depending on what you're counting.
So what was the new learning?
Folkston was a push into writing very current issues, methamphetamine, rural versus urban areas, sort of like, national, not politics, but just, the way different areas interact with each other. And I was very frightened to address those issues, and had to make sure that you address them respectfully and usefully. So it was a big lesson in, writing things that people might be very, I don't know, not upset about, but, have thoughts about, informed about, passionate about, in the way that, like, if you're writing about the Appalachian Trail, it's like, one, I felt like I knew it pretty well, but, most people are, that's not how that worked. That's not how you hike. So it was a different thing.
Yeah, so you got to personalize it as opposed to make it sound like it's the law, right? Or this is the absolute truth. You got to leave room for people. Yeah. So did you do that in the first book, and then you kind of learned in the second book to kind of back off a bit on that and leave some room for someone else's opinion on a particular subject? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and to put out, it's fiction, but put out accurate information about the things that I was talking about.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I remember reading what was a very popular novel, and it was describing a car chase in Paris, and it was inaccurate. I mean, the streets and all that, and that was right in the first chapter of the book. I did read the book, but I always questioned anything that he said when he walked into a museum or he did this. Is this fact or fiction? I mean, if you can get the streets right.
Yeah, I've been there. That's one of the frustrating things. I love Stephen King, but he'll put in the back of a couple of his books is like, I know this book was, set in New York City, but I was pretty liberal with the geography of New York City in describing such and such scene. That's why I do all fake towns.
Yeah. So when you get to the second book, though, knowing what your effort will produce economically, okay, because you've just been through the first book, how do you stick with it?
A little bit.
Did your hopes change? Did you say, oh, this is going to sell 10,000 copies?
Your hopes definitely change, and it was really nice, like having on the front end with Habits of Squirrels, like reached out to all these different booksellers or book reviewers or whoever, being able to just cash back in, and instead of having to search out all new ones, just go to someone with whom I have a relationship, like, hey, new book. Remember me from the old book. Please sell this book. So that made it. I mean, that's very satisfying. That's what was one of the odd pleasures of this. Is
Yeah,
just
so
coming
the
back
rock
in
is
my account.
already sort of moving, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But how does that keep you? So again, you sit there and so what were your if you're saying you beat the 1,000, okay, when you look at the squirrels, habits of squirrels, what were your expectations for Folkston?
Well, I did for Habits of Squirrels. I tried to get it traditionally published, queried agents, and all that.
Yeah.
For Folkston, I tried that again, much more briefly, just to sort of feel the temperature of the room.
Did you get an
And
agent?
no, it's all me.
Okay.
And so from then on, I had a much more clear-sighted thing of where things were going, and then I also sort of knew who my support team was going to be in terms of I went to the same editor, I went to the same cover designer, and then just knowing who would sell my book. But yeah, you
So what were your
realize sort of like,
expectations?
hmm, probably to try and just match the numbers of Habits of Squirrels. I think
Oh,
is
is that it? So you didn't
yeah.
have this, Fex or something like that.
No. That doesn't do you any good in this.
Well, how did you know not to?
Just, I mean, I'm not an expert in the book publishing world or even the indie book publishing world, but just listening to podcasts and reading the articles and just knowing about what you can expect in terms of like repeat readership and initial interest or who's going to wait to buy it or who's going to stock it and stuff like that, and just kind of coming up with a number or
And
not
so
a
the
number.
numbers are, so with the second book, it's much like the first book as far as expectations go.
Yeah. The first book sets the bar and gives you something out there to sort of look
So
at.
is this been a reality for you with this with Folkston?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Folkston actually got like a launch event at like a local bar and like had a group involved with it that Habits of Squirrels didn't have. So there was some growth in terms of that. Yeah, I mean, numbers and all are tracking pretty similarly.
Oh, okay, great. So as did you ever have? I thought you had this. Maybe I'm wrong, but did you ever have the thought that you could be a full-time fiction writer?
Yeah, I mean,
You
you
did
start
believe
off.
that at some point.
Yeah,
Was that when is tell me about that and then tell me what you learned.
pretty quickly, even just following other writers that you know about on Instagram or reading articles, whatever, you find out that almost no one is a full-time fiction author.
Okay.
The ones you know of are usually like a college professor or something like that, have something else going on. And then under that, it's a lot of people who, find times in the morning or afternoon, in between their real job and their real lives to make it happen.
So how do these people that have made it happen, okay, that did, you say almost no one is a full-time fiction writer, right? Is
Yep.
making a go of it, if you will. Okay. What's the difference between those that the sea of people who haven't, and those three people standing up at the top of the lighthouse? What did they do differently? What was the difference between?
Well, one, they're usually really good writers and they've found, a niche or whatever you want to call it that is what's selling right now. And they've tapped into that market. And then, and I hate to say this about other people who've done things well and been successful at it, there's just an element of luck to be, the name that gets pulled and becomes the recognizable name. Not that they don't deserve it, but just, there's a lot of people who deserve it that aren't quite making it there.
Well, that's true in lots of occupations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a mastery of marketing aspect to it. And then, I mean, sometimes it really is just who walks in, if somebody with, connections or the ability to make something happen walks into the bookstore and turns left and sees your book instead of turning right and not seeing it. It can make all the difference.
So I remember reading, what is it? Was it Stephen King's book On Writing? Is that what the name? Right. Isn't it there that he talked about how he got started? And I can't remember where he was working, what he was doing to make a living. He was
Teacher.
married. Huh?
Yeah, teacher.
He was a teacher
Yeah.
and he was married and he's writing and he was sending his books off, to get published. And then one time a check came in, if I remember right. And it was serious, it was like $10,000 or something like that, and it was like, I can quit being a teacher.
Yeah.
And then boom, he was off and running. And the Grisham story, right? He would go into work at 4:00 in the morning and he was writing it, that first hit novel, if you will, and then boom.
Yep. Well, so for Stephen King, that novel was Carrie, and he had thrown the manuscript away, and then his wife had fished it out and sent it in, he says, without his knowing. And then for John Grisham, his first book, I think, that he wrote was A Time to Kill, and
Yep.
it didn't get published until, I think, the client or the firm became such a big success, his second book, and then they went back and did it. So, I mean, it's a path for everyone. You have to keep putting yourself out there to, even give yourself a chance.
Yeah, but that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you don't know. So it's
Plugging away.
But the industry's changed between when those two authors, okay, as young authors sort of released and where you are now. What does it take for somebody to break through now? You don't have these big publishing houses that are going to buy it. You go to a publishing house and he says to you, how many names do you have? How many people are following you already, right?
Yep.
You have over 10,000 people following you. Okay, we'll pick you up. But if you say, no, I've got, 28 followers on Instagram, it's like, good luck, self-publish.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can still break through with the agent. It's rare that they'll pick a book that doesn't have a following or name attached to it. That's not like a sure thing and ready-made. I mean, it's hard. The social media angle and building a following through either like book reviews, movie reviews, writing tips, something literary adjacent. A lot of people will give like indie publishing sort of advice and call that content. It's tough. You got to find a way to build an audience. And then, a lot of people get famous through the like book of the month or like other large things that'll recommend your book to, their 4 million followers or whatever.
Oh, so like NPR's Book of the Day or any of those kind of things.
Yeah, which is usually or almost exclusively like one of the books coming out of those big houses, big publishing houses, so you already have that initial following anyway. The trick is to apply enough pressure that you sort of pop into that bubble, I guess.
Apply enough pressure to whom?
Well, just to the world, build your own base and keep pushing until that.
Have you done that? I know you were kind of flat-footed with The Habits of Squirrel as far as that base goes. Did you, as you were writing, did you continue to try to build a following in the base that you had, that you had all their names? You had an email list, if you will.
Yeah.
You did.
Active on Instagram. Even just selling books is another number that you can throw at people. I've sold so many books of, I have a following or whatever you want to call it. And then trying to build reviews or any of these just sort of numbers or statistics that you can look at. I've traveled across the Southeast. I've probably done 45 events and 40 podcasts just trying to get the Brian Livingston name out there.
And do you get, you're hoping these people will follow you? Like, what's your Instagram account?
In terms of, it's Brian Livingston Books. Yeah, it's Brian Livingston Books.
Okay, good. All right. And how many followers do you have?
Oh, man, like 780, I want to say, maybe.
Okay. But you need to really get that north of...
Way higher. Yeah.
Like, what's the people that really are going... If you were saying I want to do this full time, how many followers would you actually feel like I could cut it if I had this many followers?
Maybe K, I think, would be indicative of a full-time author that's not doing much else to support themselves.
So 50,000 followers.
Yeah, but that's a ballpark. There's a lot of factors to that.
So if 20% of the people buy your book, if they're following you, then that's 10,000 books right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And that makes
Yeah, and then you get into like triggering the Amazon algorithm in your favor and all that sort of stuff.
Got it. Wow. So when you last talked to me, you had quit being an attorney
Yep.
and you were going to write full time.
Yes.
Tell me what happened between now and then. What did you learn? What happened?
Well, I worked at REI for a while. Just
What is that?
it's a outdoor.
REI,
Yeah, REI.
the outdoor store. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Worked in operations there, and then moved
So you
just
needed
about.
to make money.
Yeah,
Were you
money,
married at the
insurance,
time?
do a thing. Excuse me.
Were you married at the time?
Yeah. So
So working at REI and working as an attorney, were they different as far as incomes go?
yes,
Okay.
and then about a year ago started with Open Space Institute in land conservation. REI is while I was there is where I wrote the vast majority of Folkston. So
Okay.
that's sort of like 16-month window.
So you were making some money.
Yeah, I mean you gotta be a responsible adult
Okay.
and continue living. Otherwise, you don't have anything to
I'm
write
sure that
about.
is that what your wife told you?
Yeah. She's been very supportive, but yeah.
Well, when you quit being an attorney, what did she say? I mean, you were
Oh, good
just
riddance.
married.
Yeah, I mean she fully supported that decision.
She did.
Yeah,
Why is that?
I was unhappy doing it.
Okay. So then she said, "Okay, so you're not going to be an attorney. We're married. We're young marrieds. I'm an attorney. Okay. I didn't expect to marry a guy and support him. So what's the deal?" She must have said that.
No, she never said that.
Okay. What did
But
she
I
say?
mean, she just said, you're gonna need to find something that's gonna make you happy. And
Okay.
so, I'd always wanted to be working in land conservation, and
Okay.
so, I put my foot in the ground and started trying to make that happen.
Right from that point.
Yeah.
And so why REI? Why not land conservation right out of the gate?
Well, there's not a lot of land conservation jobs, and REI is a good pathway, especially being in operations. There, it's a good pathway to making that happen.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
because they do. I mean, they have a full nonprofit side, and they have a lot of stuff that they do with the local nonprofits. So,
Okay.
yeah,
And when you say you were in the operations side, were you working corporate or you were working like manager of store or how did that work?
I was in the store, but doing like a
Okay.
lot of the back of the house stuff.
I got it. Okay. So you weren't on the floor.
Nah, very infrequent.
Yeah. Okay. That interesting. And your wife was fine with that?
Yeah, very supportive through the whole process. I've been very lucky.
You are very lucky. And I think that, and so but the writing, neither, it doesn't sound like you or your wife. I've forgotten her name. I'm sorry.
Olivia.
Olivia. Yeah. That you or Olivia were really counting on, she wanted you to write because it's just a big part of who you are. Okay. But neither one of you seemed to have expectations that this was going to provide some sort of a windfall.
Correct. Yeah. Especially after just going through the Habits of Squirrels process. Had much more realistic expectations of where writing was going to fit into our lives.
What were your expectations when you wrote Habits of Squirrels?
Well, you sit down and you write something, you put 3 or 4 years into it. It's like, well, obviously this is the greatest book that's ever been written. Obviously
Right.
everybody's going to see that immediately, and my troubles are over.
You do. You have that. Okay.
And then you get the book written, and you realize it's just a file on your computer, and nobody cares about it, and nobody even really knows about it, and you become much more practical very quickly, and just in terms of like understanding the effort that's going to take to get that file on your computer into people's hands.
That's really good. That is so true about entrepreneuring in general and just in the tech world. It's sort of, if I just write the app, I'm going to be a centimillionaire. It's the old, if we build it, they will come, and you realize that it's really about awareness. And you also realize the competition is incredibly intense. How many books get published every week?
It's in the millions every year, I think. I'm
Yeah.
not sure
Okay.
how it breaks
So
down to every week, but
80,000 a week. Okay.
yeah.
Like somebody take, all right. So it's, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So what are your expectations now as you go forward? Are you going to continue to promote Folkston?
Yep.
Okay. And that's an ongoing effort. Looks like you can use some help in sort of developing your Instagram so that you can start moving towards your 50,000.
Yeah. Yeah. If that's the route. Yeah.
Okay. But that costs money. You got to start investing money to kind of do that, or you got to have some sort of unique shtick,
Yeah.
like you said, a genre or something, or, it's like the lady, I can't remember that famous author, she writes about a beach town, and it's always people that like beach towns always read her stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Bald mid-30s male doesn't seem to be really drawing in the crowd.
Don't forget, man, you're a former AT wizard here, okay?
Yeah.
You did it. Okay. So what's for you as you look at this becoming, hopefully you do become a successful author, you're just chipping away at this thing. What's the most challenging part of the process of getting to that first, book, that first carry book, if you will? What's the biggest challenge for you?
The promotion aspect of it is tough. Writing the book has obviously a lot of challenges at different phases, but the
For you can get overcome those. Those are in
yeah,
your control, kind of, right?
yeah, but figuring out the market and figuring out the promotion and just, I mean, I don't have a method yet of figuring out how to do the internet promotion or anything because I've tried a lot of things that actually has a return on investment that's worthwhile, even if it's return on time investment, return on money investment. I'm not trying to be down on myself. It's a heavy push. And there's a lot to figure out, and there's a lot of people in a similar boat.
And it's not fun for you.
Correct. No, it's a frustrating
It
aspect of
really
it. But
is. I
yeah,
mean, it's chopping wood.
yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah. Okay. In fact, you'd probably enjoy that more.
Well, I think of the entrepreneur who's excited to get outside of like the bureaucracy and having like all the tedious stuff, having to sit down at the end of the day and like do his accounting and do some of that sort of stuff. There's doldrum
Yeah.
work that just has to be done.
There is payroll. People want to get paid. Yeah. And there are taxes and there are, yeah, you got investors and you got financial statements and you got board meetings and yeah, I get it. What advice, kind of maybe end in this area, but what advice? So you're the startup author. You've been doing this now. Wow, 18, so 7 years.
Yep.
Okay. What advice would you give to somebody that says, what do I need to do to really get the first book out?
Have they already written the book?
No. They're
Man,
just one of those people like you that said, I know I need to write and I need to know I know, and I don't want to be that guy at 50, who says, I knew I always wanted to be a writer, but I never wrote. Okay. So what's the advice you give to people?
it really is just sit down and do it. It's not satisfying advice at all, but like I don't like when people give like the long-winded, very romanticized versions of like how to convince yourself to do it. It's like you do eventually just have to sit down in front of your keyboard or your typewriter or dictation, whatever you're doing, and just do it. I'll have to trick myself some days to do it, like either like a glass of bourbon or a bowl of chocolates or something. But just to sit down and do it, and then to whatever helps you get into a routine of doing it, just day by day or 5 days a week, whatever, to see it through.
So it's not a matter of inspiration; it's a matter of perspiration.
No, there's a lot of good quotes out there. You go out and meet your muse. The muse is not going to come to you while you're watching TV. You have, like both my books started as different books. You have to go out there and find your inspiration.
What did you have? How many times if you're sitting down, are you 7 days a week?
I try to be when I'm in the meat of a book. Yeah.
7 days a week. How many times of how many of those 7 days did you sit down not having a clue? It was a white page and it was scary as hell.
That's relatively rare. The tough thing for me is I'll sit down and my characters will be, standing on the left side of the room and sad. And I know that by the end of the writing session, I need them to be on the right side of the room and happy. And that's, the way I do that has to be based on, what's happened so far in the book and their character traits and the weather outside and whether the AC is working and just that problem solving aspect of it. And then, you find things throughout that you're just sort of intimidated to write about and worried that you're not going to be able to convey onto the page. So that's worse for me. I've gotten pretty good about the blank page, just writing, like Ricky took 3 steps and then tripped, and working from there, just putting something stupid on the page, getting rid of that blinking cursor. And
no kidding. So that's what you do.
Yeah. It's usually, stupider, more juvenile than that. It's just.
Do you ever get to? So tell me, what's the discipline for you? Like, what's the week look like? How does your writing discipline work? Just share that with us.
I write in the mornings. Try and wake up and like have that be the first thing I do.
First thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when people talk about working out in the morning. You do it in the morning because in the afternoon you're just throughout the day you're accumulating excuses not to do it. So get out and just do it, and just don't let anything get in your way. Don't find excuses. And then if I'm really doing well,
Olivia is good with that.
Yeah.
She honors that.
Yeah, she gets frustrated with your early alarm, I think.
What time you get up?
It was like 5 or 5:15.
And you're behind the computer at what time?
If I'm up at 5, try to be by 5:15, 5:30.
And then how long will you write? How long will you sit behind that computer?
Well, it's going to be different now that we have kids. This was based on Folkston stuff, but try and do at least an hour, and then try and make it like an hour and a half or whatever. But until something comes up that drives me away, or I just get too frustrated with it.
So you don't say I'm gonna, because some of these authors that I've read that are popular authors, they say I start first thing in the morning, 7 a.m. or whatever it is for them, first thing in the morning, and I'll go 4 hours, or I go 5 hours. I go 4 hours, I think is what I read. And he's there 4 hours. He doesn't leave. It's 4 hours.
I think that's the Stephen King method.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if I ever broke through and got to do full time, that's probably more similar to what I would do. But fitting it into a day where I have other responsibilities, an hour and a half, 2 hours, it's a good chunk of time.
Even an hour, a good solid hour is good.
Yeah, and the benefit of doing it in the morning too is that it gets you thinking about the book throughout the day. So you're just sort of filter feeding your day. And
that's really good. And that's the old, and that's generally 5 days a week now, or 7 days a week. Now you've published the book,
Well, right now I'm just taking notes on my phone for a third novel. I haven't actually cracked into it.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. So you got some ideas that you're cranking on that will turn into being a dead end until you start all over again.
Yeah, they'll turn into being an entirely different story.
And this would be, it's crazy. So it said, okay, so now you you had the AT, you wrote a book. You had your life as a lawyer in a small town, you wrote a book. Does this now move outside of your experience set? Or is there a book in there as being an operation manager for REI? Or is there land conservation sort of book out there or something?
Probably more land conservation.
Okay.
See where the story takes me. It's all, you just find that initial idea that sort of like brings you to the keyboard and breaks you into the world. And then you figure out what that world actually is. Okay.
Do you think you'll stick with being a lawyer as a character? That the character will...
It's a good device. So I wouldn't be surprised if I go back to it. I'm not pushing for it.
You think you might resurrect Ethan?
Somebody who read Folkston requested a sequel based on Ethan sort of several years down the road, which I think is like the highest compliment that you can pay to an author, is wanting to spend more time with their characters.
That's beautiful.
It'd be interesting to see, because Folkston ends kind of ambiguously, what becomes of him. But then I have to decide whether I want to take that mystery away.
So it looks like you got more books. Well, I shouldn't say there's more books planned. There's a book, and that's what you do, one book at a time.
Yeah. Yeah, page by page, by letter.
But you also, it seems, are going to have to get a discipline around the whether you like it or not is the whole marketing promotion side. And this is a good time to be working on that now that you've been through this second book and you see what it looks like. There are methodologies to kind of pull that off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're out there.
They're just not something you'd rather not do than do. I get that.
Yeah,
Yeah. You've
absolutely.
never been since I've known you as a little boy, you've never been one of these self-promotion people. You do what you do and you do it well. And if people appreciate it, great. And if they don't, great. That's kind of Brian. And that doesn't seem like you've changed much. But congratulations on your new book. The book is
Thank you.
Folkston, written by Brian Livingston, and it's available everywhere.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. In all formats. Did you
Yeah.
do an Audible book?
No, there's another thing that sort of costs money and take time. It's hard to do.
It is it?
Yeah. Good.
But doing an Audible book, yeah, because you got to have a professional studio, and sometimes you got to pay somebody to read it, right? An actor.
Yeah, a voice actor that can do voices or has a soothing voice. Some authors are blessed to have that, but I do not.
I'm with you on that too. And if you get some really good voice actors like that, there you are. Pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, a good audiobook is really fun. Really nice experience.
Really I love that. And congratulations on the new book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You and Olivia having a new baby on the way. 2
Appreciate
kids.
that.
And where you're up in Greenville now?
We're in Charleston, South Carolina.
Charleston. Okay.
Yeah.
Is your sister there now too?
Virginia's in Charleston, and then Grace is still in Greenville.
Okay, good. Well, everybody's pretty close then. That's great.
Yeah. Well, we all ended up on the correct side of the Savannah River.
I see it. Okay, good. Well, congratulations to this. This has been a fun interview, and I think people will find this interesting. There are a lot of people that want to write, and it's just what you learned from your expectations as you were about to publish your first book to the expectations you have on the second book is very valuable. I'm sure it will be valuable to a lot of people. I think understanding the reality of being a writer and being a successfully published writer and well-read writer.
Yep.
It's good for people to understand that it's a slog, man. There's no, I write it and all of a sudden everybody's going to run to it.
Yeah, and you are your brand, so it's a lot of self-promotion.
A lot of self-promotion, yeah. So you got to get past that, which is something that most writers don't want to do. They don't want to self-promote.
Correct.
But I don't know. Well, I'll pray for you and I wish you well.
Thank you.
I'm
Appreciate
sure everything's
that.
going to be great. So thanks for joining us. Brian and I thank you. And please buy the book. It's The Habits of Squirrel, which is first book, which you might think, well, it's just a first book. But I want to tell you, it was excellent. If you got interested in the AT and the characters along that trail, you're going to love it. And then Folkston, another wonderful novel. To learn about small towns and lawyers and early careers. He constructs a great character in Ethan, and I think it will help you get to where you want to be and maybe answer some of the questions that you have in life as you're going through life today. So enjoy Folkston and Habits of Squirrels. Thank you, Brian, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you, Charlie.